Okay, think back to the 2016 election for a moment. It felt, well, pretty wild, right? Unconventional candidates, rhetoric that just broke all the molds.
Absolutely. It felt like a political earthquake.
But here's the thing. When you actually look at the data, the voting patterns, was it really the total anomaly we all thought it was?
That's the provocative question Bartels asks, and it's central to what we're digging into today with Ezra Klein's Why We Were Polarized.
Right. We're trying to look past the personalities and the daily news cycle to understand the deeper forces driving political division in America.
Exactly. The systems underneath it all.
And before we get too deep, if you're someone who likes exploring complex ideas like this, maybe check out the YouTube channel Mindful Moments. They use AI for book analysis, really good for stimulating critical thinking.
That sounds interesting. Fits right in.
So our goal today is pretty straightforward. Pull out the key insights from Klein's work, give you a clearer picture of how we got so polarized.
And that starts with challenging that bizarre election narrative for 2016. Bartels' analysis is, well, eye-opening.
How so?
He shows this surprising consistency in how people voted across several elections leading up to 2016. Take gender, for instance.
Okay, big topic that year.
Huge. Clinton is the first woman nominee, Trump's comments. You'd expect a massive shift. But the exit polls, Trump won 52% of men.
Which was?
Exactly the same percentage Romney won in 2012, 52%.
No way, really.
And among women, Trump got 41%.
Yeah.
Now, that's a dip from McCain's 43% in '08, but it's hardly a collapse,
That completely goes against the grain of how it felt. So these basic demographic voting blocks held pretty steady.
Remarkably so. And what about party loyalty? The idea that Republicans fled Trump.
Yeah, that was a big narrative, too.
Well, look, self-identified Republicans.
Yeah.
In '04 and '12, the GOP candidate got 93%. In '08, it was 90%. And Trump in 2016.
Let me guess, still high?
88%. A small drop, maybe some hesitation, but definitely not a mass exodus.
Okay. And didn't the Democrat actually win the popular vote?
Yes. In 2008, 2012, and 2016. The last time by almost 3 million votes.
So Bartels' question really hits home then. If you only looked at the voter data from, say, 2004 to 2016.
Could you definitively pick out 2016 as the bizarre one? It's tough. It suggests something more systemic at play.
Which is exactly Klein's point, right? Move away from blaming or crediting individuals.
Precisely. Focus on the systems. Klein talks about this feedback loop of polarization.
How does that work?
Basically, a more polarized public starts demanding, or at least electing, more polarized politicians and supporting more polarized institutions.
And those politicians and institutions then
turn around and reinforce the divisions in the public. It feeds itself. Cause and effect get tangled up.
That makes sense. It helps to look back historically, too. Klein talks about the mid-20th century parties being sort of mushy.
Yeah, a mush, he calls it. Ideological diversity within the parties. You had liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats. Voter intentions weren't always crystal clear based on party label.
But some people actually wanted clearer divisions, didn't they?
Right. Sam Rosenfeld's work, The Polarizers, argues there's a logic to it. The idea was to offer voters a more distinct ideological choice, make the parties really stand for something different.
Interesting. But weren't there warnings against that?
Oh, absolutely. Back in 1959, figures like Nixon and Robert F. Kennedy actually warned against dividing the parties strictly along liberal-conservative lines.
Why? What were they worried about?
They feared it would deepen societal divisions, make politics too much of an us versus them battle across the board.
And looking at the data since then,
their fears seem pretty validated. Those feeling thermometer scores, how warmly people feel about the other party, they plummeted between 1980 and 2016.
Plummeted how much?
Dramatically. And by 2016, you had huge chunks of both parties. 45% of Republicans, 41% of Democrats saying the other side wasn't just wrong, but a threat to the nation's well-being.
Wow. That's beyond policy disagreement. That's existential.
Exactly. It's a different level of animosity.
So the clarity they aimed for came with this big cost of distrust and division, and it affects everyone, even independents.
Yeah, the research on sticky partisanship is fascinating. Today's independents, they actually lean towards one party more reliably than strong partisans did in the past.
Really? Why?
Because the differences between the parties have become so obvious, so stark. Even if you're not paying close attention to politics day to day, you can see the divide.
And it's not just about policy anymore, is it? It's about identity.
That's a core driver. Liliana Mason's research shows this clearly. Back in 1952, Democrats and Republicans looked pretty similar demographically.
But now
Our party identity increasingly overlaps with our race, our religion, where we live, other social identities. So a political argument can feel like an attack on who you are.
yeah, I can see that. And there are psychological factors too, right? Like different worldviews.
Definitely. The idea of fixed versus fluid worldviews comes into play. People with a more fixed outlook, preferring clear rules, maybe more sensitive to threat fake, tend to cluster in one party. Those of the more fluid view cluster in the other.
And this sorting is stronger for people who are really into politics.
Yes, research links personality traits like openness to experience pretty strongly to party affiliation among the politically engaged. It changes politics from just being about policies
to being about expressing your identity, your tribe.
Exactly. It becomes about who we are. And thinking about these deep links between who we are and our politics, resources like Mindful Moments in our podcasts can be really helpful for reflecting on these powerful forces.
That identity piece leads right into group psychology, doesn't it?
It really does. Henri Tajfil's experiment's a classic here. He'd divide people into groups based on, like, a coin toss. Totally arbitrary.
And what happened?
People immediately started favoring their own group. They'd give more points or hypothetical money to people in their minimal group, even though it meant nothing. And they discriminate against the outgroup.
Just like that, based on nothing.
Just like that. It shows this deep-seated human need to belong, to favor the us over the them. Think about sports rivalries, the intense emotions.
Oh, yeah. Totally irrational sometimes, but powerful.
It's a similar dynamic.
Yeah.
And there's an evolutionary basis. Vivek Murthy talked about how social isolation triggers a physical stress response. We're wired for connection, for the group.
And Joseph Heath argues our brains are still sort of set up for small hunter-gatherer groups.
Right, making us maybe less equipped to handle the massive, abstract groups of modern politics and more easily swayed by those simple in-group, out-group stories.
Which leads to negative partisanship.
Exactly. Often what drives people politically isn't so much love for their own side, but dislike, even hatred for the other side. That animosity is a huge motivator.
So it's this potent mix of positive feelings for your team and negative feelings for the opposition.
And that combination really structures a lot of American politics today.
And it gets amplified because all our identities are lining up now. Ideology, religion, geography, all sorting onto the same political teams.
That's a key point. When identities stack up like that, instead of cross-cutting, conflict gets much more intense. Studies show societies with more cross-cutting identities tend to be less prone to civil conflict.
But we're moving in the opposite direction.
It seems so. Liliana Mason's work, again, even people who might agree with the other party on some policies, still show warm feelings for their party and cold feelings for the other. Identity trumps policy agreement.
So the problem isn't just having a party identity.
It's that the party identity is swallowing up all these other important social identities. Race, religion, culture. They all get mapped onto Democrat or Republican.
And that raises the stakes emotionally.
Erratically.
Yeah.
It's not just about tax rates anymore. It feels like it's about your whole way of life, your values, your community being under attack.
Which might explain why Shanto Iyengar found that political identity is seen as fair game for hatred.
Precisely. His research shows people are much more willing now to express negative feelings about the opposing party compared to, say, racial or gender groups. Look at attitudes towards cross-party marriage.
How have they changed?
In the 1960s, people didn't care much. Now, partisans, especially strong ones, increasingly disapprove of their child marrying someone from the other party.
Wow. So Iyengar thinks this partisan dislike is almost like a permitted prejudice?
That's his hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's become socially acceptable to dislike, even discriminate against, people based on their party affiliation. The individual mandate in Obamacare is a good example.
How so?
Many Republicans had actually supported similar ideas before, but once it became linked to Obama and the Democrats.
Instant unified opposition. Policy history didn't matter as much as the partisan fight.
Exactly. Partisan identity overrode previous policy positions.
Okay, so if identities are this strong and animosity is this high, just giving people more facts isn't going to fix it, is it?
Probably not. Dan Kahan's work on motivated reasoning is pretty sobering here.
What does that show?
It shows that people, even those who are good with numbers, tend to interpret information in a way that confirms what their group believes. He did studies involving things like skin cream effectiveness versus gun control laws.
And
When the issue was politicized, like gun control, People's math skills didn't help them reach the correct answer if it contradicted their group's position. They used their smarts to rationalize their group's view.
So being smarter doesn't necessarily make you more accurate on political stuff.
It can actually make you better at justifying your biases. Aiken and Bartels found that more politically informed voters can sometimes be more likely to believe factual inaccuracies if they fit their narrative, like myths about the budget deficit under Clinton.
That's depressing. Why does that happen?
Kahan argues it's often individually rational, meaning for your social standing within your group, being wrong on a fact but aligned with the group is less costly than being factually right but disagreeing with your tribe. The social consequences of dissent can be huge.
Like being cast out of your social circle?
Potentially, yeah. Think about the entire political ecosystem, the think tanks, the media outlets. It often reinforces this identity protective thinking. Even experts aren't immune. Remember the predictions about the Supreme Court upholding Obamacare?
Yeah, many legal experts got that wrong.
Because they underestimated the role of partisan alignment and motivated reasoning, even among judges. Our brains are kind of wired to defend our team.
So facts struggle against identity. And then there's the whole demographic change piece.
A huge factor. Contrast Obama's 2008 message of hope and change with Trump's 2016 message, which often tapped into a sense of threat, a desire to go back to an older America.
And that connects to real demographic shifts.
Absolutely. The U.S. is changing rapidly. You see it in the median ages of different racial groups, the fact that in many states, white deaths now outnumber white births, the rising foreign-born population, the declining percentage of white Christians.
Robert P. Jones talks about a tipping point.
Yeah, arguing that the historically dominant white Christian culture is no longer the numerical majority. And these shifts aren't just numbers. They provoke deep psychological reactions.
Fueling fights over things like political correctness, representation.
Exactly. #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, immigration debates, they're all intertwined with these broader cultural and demographic anxieties. James Baldwin had that great line about identity being questioned when dominance falters or the marginalized rise up.
And Obama himself, even though he didn't talk about race constantly.
His very presence symbolized this shift for some, particularly some white voters who felt a loss of control or status.
Yeah.
His share of the white vote actually declined compared to previous Democrats.
So it's this feeling of the country changing and some groups feeling left behind or threatened.
Amy Chua calls it political tribes. It mobilizes people who feel their group is losing ground. You heard echoes of it in conservative media reactions to demographic change.
And political strategies shifted too. The RNC wanted outreach in 2012.
But the strategy that worked for Trump was mobilizing those missing white voters, tapping into that sense of cultural grievance. Ashley Jardina's work on white identity politics argues this force was underestimated for a long time.
So it wasn't just economic anxiety.
That's part of it, but research suggests identity and cultural concerns were at least as important, maybe more so. Higher-income Republicans in 2016 were actually less satisfied than lower-income Democrats. That points beyond just economics.
And the focus on political correctness, is that tied in?
Very much so. A fear that discourse is being unfairly policed, that certain viewpoints are being shut down. It connects to the anxieties about cultural change.
And you see this reflected in party platforms, like on immigration.
Big shifts. Compare the Democratic platform in 1996 to 2016 on immigration. Much different tone and substance, reflecting the changing demographics of the party itself.
And framing matters, how these changes are presented.
Hugely. Research shows you can frame demographic change in ways that increase the sense of threat or decrease it. It's a real challenge to offer reassurance without dismissing genuine anxieties.
Even politicians adapt their messages over time, right?
Oh, yeah. Look at how figures like Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden evolved their positions on race and immigration to align with the changing Democratic base. It reflects where the energy and the voters are.
And then the media comes into this whole mix.
Right. In a world with infinite distractions, most people follow politics like a hobby, if at all. So media outlets are competing intensely for scarce attention.
Like the Netflix CEO saying sleep is their competitor.
Exactly. And Marcus Pryor's research showed how the internet changed things. Instead of just watching the evening news because it was on, people could choose content based purely on interest.
Leading to people sorting themselves into information bubbles.
Partly. It widened the gap between the politically interested, who often seek out partisan conflict, and the uninterested. The media landscape adapted, often focusing on reinforcing identities and highlighting the fight.
Identity journalism.
Yeah, media that tells you who your group is, who the opposition is, reinforcing those bonds. It makes views harder to change. There was that study paying Twitter users to follow bots posting opposing views.
Did it change their minds?
Not really.
Right.
Their core beliefs didn't shift much.
And the algorithms on social media, they push engagement.
Which often means pushing the most outrageous, identity-activating stuff. So the media isn't just reflecting polarization. It's actively shaping it by choosing what stories to elevate.
Well, like the coverage of Trump in 2016.
Massive amounts of coverage, far more than other candidates. Cable news, network news. It was constant. Remember the CBS chairman saying it might not be good for America, but it was damn good for CBS.
Oof. Yeah, so the bias is towards loud, controversial, identity-focused stories.
That seems to be the incentive structure. And the structure of the parties matters too. Democrats are often described as a coalition of different interest groups.
Whereas Republicans,
more often built around a tighter ideological core. Though, as we said, for many voters, it's more about conservative identity than strict adherence to doctrine. Trump understood that.
even when his positions weren't traditionally conservative.
Right. It was about fighting for the tribe. And the media ecosystems differ. Mainstream media tries for neutrality, sometimes leading to tough coverage for Democrats. But the conservative movement has built its own media sphere, often explicitly opposing mainstream institutions.
Creating a more ideologically consistent information environment for Republicans.
Generally, yes. There's strong conservative media, but the demand is often for content that reinforces identity, not necessarily challenges it.
And the political system itself, like the Senate and Electoral College?
They have geographic biases that currently tend to favor the GOP. This means Republicans can often win by appealing to a base further to the right.
While Democrats need broader coalitions to win nationally.
Often, yes. They have to appeal across a wider ideological range. That "Take Our Country Back" slogan from the Tea Party era really captured that sense of reacting against perceived cultural and political losses.
And you still hear rhetoric framing politics as a fundamental battle for values.
Definitely. Think of Attorney General Barr's speech about fighting secularism, or Jerry Falwell Jr. wanting street fighters like Trump. It frames the conflict in stark existential terms.
So putting it all together, it's incredibly complex. History, psychology, identity, demographics, media, institutions.
It's a whole system. Deep historical roots, powerful psychological drivers, major social shifts, all interacting. There are no simple villains or easy fixes here.
So maybe a final thought for people to chew on. As all these different parts of our lives, our beliefs, our background, where we live, merge into these single, powerful, political mega identities.
How is that changing not just our politics, but our personal relationships, how we see each other, even how we see ourselves?
It's a profound question. We really hope this discussion has given you some useful frameworks for thinking about it.
Please subscribe to the show if you found this valuable, and share it with others trying to make sense of things. You can find a link to Klein's book, Why We Were Polarized, in the show notes if you want to explore further.
And most importantly, keep engaging critically. Keep asking questions about the information you consume and the systemic forces shaping our world.